May put down her steaming hot chocolate and stood up to answer the doorbell. She was a little slower than usual and winced slightly at the dull ache in her hip. She is no longer young, and age gradually became a problem for her. She tried to add more pep to her step, feeling that the more movement she put into her step, the better she would feel. As with many things in her recent life, it was a case of fake it till you make it. Recent events had made it difficult. She had a lot on her mind, but she had to put that aside for today and provide support to someone who needed her full attention. She could see the figures of two people through the frosted glass on the door. She opened the door, a welcoming smile on her face, just like she had been taught to be a good housewife. "Hello," she said with genuine pleasure at the sight of her visitors. It was cold in Buffalo Grove, the town on the northern outskirts of Chicago, where she lived, so cold that you could see your breath. She had a house in the countryside, just off the main street, close enough that she could walk to the little tourist traps of the antique buildings, although she never did. She lived there for almost 7 years, becoming a permanent resident of the town after her troubles in the southern Illinois town of Champaign-Urbana. The two women on her threshold greeted her, their breath chilling the air, clearly eager to come out of the cold. Come in, it's freezing here." "Winter is early this year," she said, stepping back and inviting her guests into the warm house. The two women entered, knowing the way. They've been there before, many times. In the large room, with high ceilings lined with large pine beams, a fire danced in the fireplace. There were two armchairs and a love seat placed around the fireplace, which was surrounded in a semicircle by a fireplace with a hood above it, similar to the circular fireplaces you see at ski resorts. Family photographs hung on the walls, souvenirs of a life lived were laid out on the shelves. A television was installed above the fireplace, and in the corner, in front of the tightly closed French windows, stood a white lacquered piano with even larger photographs neatly arranged on the lacquered surface. On one of the walls, there was an exact striking clock. Visitors took off their coats and scarves, carefully placing them on a hanger installed by the door for such occasions. "Hi, May. How are you? Aren't you cold?" asked the first, a tall brunette with voluminous brown hair that flowed and curled around her shoulders. Gina Stipe was from a Western European family, tall, slender, with thin but elastic limbs. She was wearing black trousers, Ugg boots, and a thin white blouse with a long, thick cardigan over the top. Gina was the epitome of modern fashion and worked hard to maintain her slim 5'10" body. She was no stranger to the gym and worked out hard. May rolled her eyes. "Why is that the first thing everyone says when it gets cold?" she asked, with a slight southern accent in her voice. "Everyone always says, 'Isn't it cold?' And it's very annoying. Yes, it's cold. We all feel it." May did her best impression of a Chicago accent, and both women exchanged smiles. May was in one of her moods again. "I'm sure she didn't mean anything bad, May. It's just a greeting," the second woman, Rhonda Ranta, said with mock seriousness. Rhonda was also tall, but a little shorter than Gina, about 5'8", but she made up for it with the high heels she always wore. Rhonda had short blonde hair, clear pale skin, and was the living embodiment of Scandinavian beauty. She had a very distinctive accent. She sometimes missed words in sentences when she was excited or in a hurry, despite living in the United States for over 13 years. Today she was dressed for the weather. Thick tights, leather boots with 3-inch heels, and a long knitted dress with a scarf sewn with Velcro around her neck. The interesting difference was that Gina was perfectly made up with just the right amount of foundation, blush, and eye makeup, while Rhonda didn't have a drop of makeup on, and both looked good. Gina looked around and asked May, "She's not there yet, right?" May moved to a chair closer to the door and shook her head as she sat down. "Not yet. I said any time after 4, so I guess it won't be long." She pointed to the tea and coffee set out on the coffee table and said, "Help yourself, ladies." Rhonda sighed and said, "So, we're doing it again, huh? Opening up old wounds again?" "That's what we do," Gina said sharply. "You know, it's good for our soul. Those who come to us need to know that we are just like them. No better and no worse. They need to feel comfortable. This is the only way to get them to open up so that we can give them the support they need. Also, telling stories is soul cleansing. Every time I do it, I find a new dimension. I explore this a little bit again, and one day, hopefully, the damn thing will fall out. Rhonda looked at Gina and sighed again. I know. I just feel like, I don't know sometimes, like it's just making me worse. Reliving it all over again. It's almost harder to move on, you know. Well, Rhonda, no one is forcing you to come back. I'd say that when you're ready to move on, you probably won't need us anymore. The fact that you're still here. May spread one hand, holding it in the other while still steaming hot chocolate. Rhonda grinned with annoyance, shrugged her shoulders indifferently, and turned her attention to pouring herself coffee. There was an awkward silence as May stared into the distance and Gina and Rhonda poured themselves coffee. Gina caught Rhonda's eye and looked at her confused. They settled on the couch for a moment, each taking a sip, and then Gina asked, "Did anyone see the good wife last night?" Rhonda furrowed her brow. "God, we must be desperate to talk about this crap. Good coffee, May," she said, nodding to May. May smiled weakly in response, still mentally far away. "But then it couldn't be worse than that terrible mess that Deanna cooked. Remember that?" Rhonda said, miming gagging with her finger in her mouth. Rhonda giggled. "Yeah, that was pretty bad, wasn't it?" The doorbell rang, and all three looked expectantly in that direction. "Well," May said, putting down her hot chocolate, "I guess I need to be the most hospitable hostess." She went to open the door, leaving Gina and Rhonda. "I miss Deanna," Gina said wistfully. "Well, she has her own life, Rhonda. She has moved on. We still see her from time to time, but she doesn't need us anymore. Trey took care of that." "And Ryan," Rhonda muttered under her breath. She was still slightly annoyed that all their plans and intrigues had not led to the desired conclusion. May then returned to the room, leading a young woman who couldn't have been more than 30. She had dyed blonde hair with dark roots that were beginning to emerge. She had fair skin with slight redness around her eyes and nose, indicating that she had either been out in the cold too much or had cried too much, or both. She was wearing a light summer coat over a stretchy wool dress that reached her knees, and she was clearly cold. "And these are the girls. These are Rhonda and Gina," May said, leading the new arrival into the room. "You look cold, honey. Gina, would you kindly pour some coffee for Brooklyn? She needs to warm up. Brooklyn, isn't it? Do you prefer Brooke?" Brooklyn looked around, assessing the room and trying not to judge the other two women too obviously. "What? Oh yeah, Brooklyn, Bree, whatever. I respond to everything. Just not, hey, easy girl. That's enough for me from Josh." "Sit down, dear, in front of the fireplace. Sugar? Milk?" Brooklyn sat down on the love seat at right angles to the sofa and looked gratefully at Gina, who poured her coffee and handed it from the exquisite Chinese tea set on the coffee table. "No, black, please." "Like your men," Rhonda tried to joke and immediately realized that this was the worst thing that could be said. "Oh, don't mind her, honey. She thinks she's funny. We can't tell her she's not," May replied smoothly, taking in Brooklyn's pained expression. "Sorry," Rhonda said. "I wasn't thinking. I'm nervous. New person, you know how it is." Brooklyn's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and they could see the internal struggle between running or fighting. In the end, the battle won, and she simply said, "It's okay," in a voice that said maybe it would be okay, but don't do it again or you'll get busted. Okay, as all men have learned, is a code word for women. It actually means not okay at all, but I agree and don't do it again. This word makes men tremble. For the smaller woman, it was obvious that Brooklyn wasn't going to put up with much crap. "So, Brooke, we have a standard way to start here. I know you're hurting, we've all been there, and we can understand. We know you need support, otherwise you wouldn't come to us. Don't worry about talking a lot at this meeting. We are here more to open our souls to you than the other way around. We want you to know that this is a safe place, and the only way to do that is to tell our stories among friends." Brooklyn looked at Gina and smiled faintly. That sounds good, I guess. I don't know. I'm all confused. I've ruined everything so much, and I just don't know what to do. He barely talks to me. Mostly his shark lawyer who licks his lips every time I'm trying to give Josh a message. I can't figure out if he wants to get into my panties or just enjoys my pain. We never got along. Gina sat down on the edge of the couch and extended her hand, placing it on Brooklyn's arm. Everything will be fine. We've been where you are. It's getting better. Slowly, but it's getting better. I think, honey, another thing we need to emphasize is that we are not a group of man-haters. We are not a coven of bitter women who think all men are bad. Like I said on the phone, we are here to support each other and try to get back to normal. We've all made mistakes, and we don't make a secret of it. This is not the place to justify our actions. If you need an excuse, you need to move on. We strive to acknowledge our mistakes and try to accept them. Today it's common to say, accept them, and then move on without placing all the blame on someone else, May said, entering the conversation. Yes, Rhonda said, nodding toward May's comment. Yes, we have to accept our responsibility. There may have been extenuating circumstances, but we have to deal with them individually. We all screwed up, and part of what our little group is doing is, it's about accepting it and helping each other move forward. Like a 12-step program, but without all those annoying steps, no higher power to bother me, that's for sure. So, I just don't know what to do right now. I've filed for divorce. I live in this crappy studio apartment. I've seen the kids 4 times since everything happened, and the only lawyer I can afford is just disgusting. Josh said he'd treat me okay in a divorce. But I don't want a divorce, and he doesn't even talk to me seriously, but it quickly devolves into insults. Brooklyn sobbed at the end of her statement, becoming increasingly angry, more and more upset as the story progresses. It's okay. Don't worry, Brooke. We're here to help. We won't help you get revenge or try to have your husband financially, but you're not alone. We've been through what you're going through, and we'll be here for you. Why? Sobbed Brooklyn, looking at the woman, self-pity struggling on her face. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, what I'm still doing. The last sentence was said with obvious moaning. Rhonda and Gina exchanged glances, a little unsure. Trying to explain why they do what they do has been difficult. It was painful for every woman present. Well, if you want to give us an idea of why you're here, there is no need to go into details, Rhonda began. No, it's okay. I can do this. I can talk about it. I need to talk about it. No one in my family wants to hear it, least of all Josh. Are you sure, honey? May asked softly, sitting up and leaning forward. We really don't want to embarrass you. No, it's okay. It's going to be hard, but I think I need to do this. Explain everything, Brooklyn said, giving May a small but grateful smile. Okay, well, you have your say, Brooklyn. Stop whenever you need to, May said, waving her hand and pointing at the room at large. Okay, well, I'm Brooklyn. Brooklyn Stone. Well, I was. I guess I'll be at Brooklyn Hall again soon. Oh, Brooklyn paused for a few moments, thinking about it. Neither woman spoke, giving her time to calm down. A clock struck loudly in the background. Brooklyn looked up, suddenly realizing that she had simply stopped talking. Anyway, am for now, I guess, married to Josh Stone. I'm 32, I know, I look young. I always have. Josh is 35. I'm from around here, born and raised in Orland Park, in the South. Josh is also from Chicago, big family, brothers and sisters. You know how it is. One brother is a policeman, another 2 are firefighters, Josh something like that. Financial consultant. He doesn't do real trading, he used to, but the stress was too much. Now he's a strategic consultant. He advises companies on trading strategies and other things. In his spare time, he works with a small group of programmers, writes some kind of auto trading application for iPhones. Something like that. I don't know for sure. Brooklyn shook her head, as if annoyed that she hadn't remembered something important. So, I'm a paralegal. I work at an entertainment law firm downtown. I was going to become a lawyer, but the cost of taking the bar exam, plus the hours of work. Well, I didn't want to sacrifice my life, you know. We've been married for 8 years. We have 2 children, Tara and Adrian. They are wonderful children. I know everyone says that, but mine, they really are. Brooklyn smiled, then opened the photo app on her phone and found the kids' folder. Here, look, she said, handing the phone to Gina. Gina couldn't help but notice that Brooklyn's hand was shaking. Gina looked, Rhonda leaned over her, and both made sounds appropriate to the situation. She then handed the phone to Rhonda, who handed it to May, who did the same. So? Gina asked slowly as she handed the phone back to Brooklyn. Oh yeah, exactly, Brooklyn said. Well, everything was good, you know. Good marriage. Josh was great. We met at a church meeting. I mean, neither of us are particularly religious. I was only there to deliver brownies with my sister. She's a pastry chef, and he was there as a contestant on Big Brother America. It was Josh, the big scout and savior of the world. Well, it was one of those love at first sight situations anyway, Brooklyn said sadly, plunging into memories. Gina grinned at Rhonda. They both knew what she was talking about. We talked for hours, exchanged phone numbers. He insisted on taking a photo of himself on my phone to attach to a contact, and then insisted I do the same. In general, you know how it goes. Dates, movies, flowers, dinners, hot evenings, romance, the whole package. If there was a romantic gesture, he did it. He even made his dog fetch the ring when he proposed. My family just adored him, and I think his family loved me too. Well, part of her, that's for sure. The last 2 words were said in a low voice. Gina and Rhonda exchanged glances again, and Gina risked a quick glance at May, who was watching Brooklyn closely. Clearly, they were getting to the heart of the matter, and it didn't take a genius to see where this was going. We had a great life for several years. Josh was attentive. He was good in bed, no complaints. I had many men. I know what is good and what is not, and he never gave me any complaints. The children are wonderful. We rarely argued. We have a nice house in Schaumburg, far enough from the family that they are not on the doorstep every day, but close enough that we can easily visit whenever we want. Everything was. Well, it was fine. Makes what I did even more stupid. I cheated on him with his brother, Michael, for 3 months. I don't even know how it started. We were at a barbecue, had some beer, had some stupid flirting. I mean, we all flirt a little. Not a lot, just a little. It's like part of his family, and I just responded in kind, you know. One day, I found myself in the bathroom pleasuring Michael. I still don't know how it happened. I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't so drunk that I didn't know what I was doing. It was just like I was out. Myself, you know. I look back and I can't understand what I was thinking, what I was feeling. It just happened. The flirting became more and more serious, and suddenly here I am. I still don't understand why. Gina and Rhonda exchanged glances while May continued to stare at Brooklyn. It was a familiar story. And it was, well, it was good. You know, exciting, mysterious, wrong, wicked, I don't know. It was just fun. I was beside myself, almost, doing what I knew I couldn't do. So, we did it. I couldn't help myself. It was like the most important thing at that moment, to get it and bring passion down on him. Suddenly, it became the worst thing I could do. It was like a switch had been flipped. I couldn't even look at him, and after he pulled up his pants, I pushed him out the door. Brooklyn stopped talking, looking at the other women and their reactions, the fear of being judged obvious on her face. You don't need to go into detail, dear, May said softly. We don't need details if you're uncomfortable. Rhonda and Gina recalled their first meeting with the group. It took them a while to get all the details out, while Brooklyn clearly had no qualms about going into the grim details. Apparently, it was part of her nature to not shy away from the truth. I couldn't even look at Josh for the rest of the party. And as for having sex with him, forget it. I couldn't do it. I felt like if he only looked at me, he would know what I did. He would understand. but he didn't know. He just wondered why I was so quiet and restless, but he just said that he would give me space and be there when I wanted to talk. I mean, yeah, like I said, talk to him. Yes, as if I was going to do that. I spent a week trying to figure out what I'd done. To figure it out, I vowed never to be alone with Michael again. I wasn't in love with him. I wasn't infatuated with him. It was more about what we'd done than about him. Person, do you understand? She glanced anxiously at the other women, and Gina and Rhonda exchanged glances with a narrow smile that meant that, yes, they knew what she was talking about. Gina said softly, yes, and Rhonda simply nodded. May patted Brooklyn's hand and said, I think we understand, Brooklyn. We understand too well. We understand. Brooklyn took a deep breath and continued, well, my resolve lasted 2 weeks. Then, while Josh was in some evening meeting, Michael showed up. I didn't even want to let him in, but he said he wanted one of Josh's tools, so that I was kind of forced to let him in. The children were with friends, and 3 minutes after he appeared, he caressed me. And what's worse? The last words were spoken with a sob. I wanted this from the moment I opened the door. I knew why he came, and I was just excited by the thought. I was on fire. Then we had sex, rough, on the couch. Josh could come in at any moment, and that somehow made it even more exciting. I don't know, I could barely look Michael in the eyes. He kept saying that like, take it, bitch, and all that, and I didn't even try to stop him. And that's how it all started. I didn't have to worry about contraception. I had an implant in my arm. She raised her hand and pointed to a small area under her triceps. That lasted for 3 years. So Michael just showed up sometimes when he knew Josh won't be around and the kids are busy. And we didn't talk much. We never mentioned Josh or the kids or his fiancée. We both knew it was like a release, you know. We even invited his fiancée and himself to dinner, and there were no languid looks when they were there. Nothing to indicate that we were in a different kind of relationship. I was just his toy. It's fun. And he was mine. I felt guilty, but it was like it was in my mind. I was still functioning as the same wife I always was. There were times when I refused Josh, simply because I knew I was hurting but in most cases I didn't refuse. And I made sure that I was washed and cleaned for him. Several times I initiated sex myself, in a romantic way. I needed to be sure that I still loved my husband, and I did. Nothing changed. If anything, it got better, because I could compare the lack of love from Michael. He loved me and took time. And then everything went to hell. Everything became known. Brooklyn wiped her eyes as she said the last sentence, emotions flowing over the edge. I still don't know how Josh found out. I don't think it matters. I got a call from Michael just saying he knows, and then he hung up. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what. Josh knows if he knows the whole truth or just part of it. Does he know that we did this in our house or what else he might know? I didn't know whether to leave or what to do. So I cleaned the house and waited for him to return. He never came, at least that night. I didn't know whether to call him or wait. The children asked where he was, and I said that he had work to do. He showed up 3 days later, looking like hell. I didn't know what to do. I tried to go up to him and hug him, and he didn't even want to touch me. He was so hurt, and cruel in words. Called me a bitch and a slut. Later I found out that he beat Michael half to death and expelled him as a brother and gave his parents an ultimatum. Either they also disown him or lose him as a son. He told Michael's fiancée everything, and now she will look for me. I didn't know what to do. I tried to talk to him, but he just kept telling me to shut up and leave. 4 days later, I was served with divorce papers. They even had pictures of us. He told me to leave, and I started packing my things for children, and then he became physically rude, just grabbed me and shouted that I was leaving, and they were staying. I was scared for the first time, so I gathered what I could and left as quickly as possible. He was unshaven, angry, his eyes were red, and he was just so angry. I mean, I can understand it. I betrayed him with his brother. But I was scared. He was just so angry. I don't think I've ever seen him like that before. He would have hit me, but his eyes were so wild. Gina and May exchanged glances full of sympathy. "It's okay, child. It's in the past. It's now. There's no judgment here," May said softly. Brooklyn sobbed slightly, then smiled sheepishly at the other three women. "Sorry," she said. "I thought I was over it." She took a moment longer to calm down, then smiled, both bold and fragile. "So, here I am, in a lousy studio apartment. He filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. His brother is completely excluded from the family. I see the children, and they don't fully understand Josh is not depriving me of them, but he is doing this so that we don't cross paths when I see them. I took them from his parents and brought them back there." There was silence as Brooklyn stared into the distance. Then she whispered, "But that's not the worst part." The other three women simply looked at her as she looked from one face to another. "I don't know if I can even say it out loud," she said, staring at the floor again. After a few moments of silence, she suddenly said, "I'm still doing it." There was a shocking silence as the other women digested the news. "He calls me sometimes, tell me to be at the motel, and for some reason I go," she said lifelessly, still looking at the floor. "I have nothing to do. Josh gives me enough money to live on, but not more. I thought about going back to work. I thought about finishing everything, but then I think about the children. But when Michael calls, I go. It's mechanical. He has me, I get up, get dressed, and go home, thoughtless. I don't even know why I'm walking. He's still covered in bruises and pain. I think now it's a matter of revenge for him." There was silence again at this revelation, each woman trying to process her shock and figure out how to respond. May was the first to pull herself together. Smoothly, she said, "Well then, child, I have to ask, do you want to continue this? Go to him." A quiet answer, "No," came from Brooklyn, and she continued to look at the floor. "Well," May said again, "I think we should do something about this. Rhonda, do you still have a spare room?" Rhonda nodded. "I think young Brooklyn should stay with you. Will everything be okay, Brooke?" Brooklyn looked up, her tears smearing her makeup. "Would you do that?" "Of course," Gina said softly. "We all would. You need support and help. This bastard is taking advantage of you. You need help to resist him and drive him away, and we are here to help." "It's settled," May said with some satisfaction. "Brooklyn, you can stay with Rhonda until you get settled, and she can support you and keep that disgusting man away from you. Looks like he got what he deserved for seducing his brother's wife. Really." Everyone sat still for a while, and Brooklyn pulled out a packet of wet wipes from her bag, which she began to wipe off the smudged makeup. "Are you seeing any therapist, honey?" May asked after a few minutes of thought. "No, I've been thinking about it, but I don't know how to find it. I want to go to couples therapy with Josh, but he doesn't want to talk about it." May nodded. "Well, I guess that's typical, honey. Given the situation now and his low opinion of you, he doesn't want to hear your voice, and I'm not entirely sure that he's wrong or that it's a bad thing. Although it's true that there are certain window opportunities to turn the situation around, it is also true that if the injured party does not even want to try at that moment, then it will still not work. It is better for you to spend time understanding yourself, understanding what happened, and getting help and tools to fight with this, and then come back and try to talk. It may be too late, but going with your hands and desperately is also not the way to success. The fact that he at least talks to you and does not just cut you out of his life this is already a big plus." Gina chimed in, "Brooklyn should use my therapist. She's really good." "What about that guy Deanna used?" May asked. Gina shook her head. "She needs a woman, May. Look at her." May looked at Brooklyn, who was quietly crying again. "Yeah, maybe you're right. Can you arrange a meeting, Gina?" May asked. "Of course. You know I can," Gina replied, glad to have something concrete to offer. "I don't know if I can pay for this. I'm still on Josh's health insurance, and I'm not sure if this is covered." "Hush, child," May said a little sharply. Then she continued more softly, "We can help with this. You just need to talk to a qualified professional. We can offer support, but we are not therapists and do not claim to be. Don't worry about the cost. We'll all figure it out later. Brooklyn wiped her face with a napkin and looked at the other women, asking in a trembling voice, "Why? Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I don't know you. Why are you trying to help me?" There was surprise in her voice, but it was a fair question. In fact, this was the main question of the evening, the reason for her presence in May's house. May made a hum, the sound a person makes when they are about to start a long, detailed answer. "Well," she said, for the third time, "we all have a past. You've heard us say several times that we've all been through it and been where you are. It's not just words. All three of us have done questionable decisions in the past. We have all hurt other people, made mistakes, and then often made them worse. We have created a kind of support network for those who, like us, have made mistakes and need help. A safe place to talk about it, sort it out, and either commit to trying to rebuild or, if necessary, move on." Brooklyn pulled back a little and said, "Are you all screwed up like I was?" "Oh, honey," Gina said with a smile, "you have no idea." "Seriously?" Brooklyn asked with a small smile on her face, the first one they had seen. "Oh, yes," Rhonda said firmly, "very much." "Actually," May said, "one of the things we usually do at the first meeting is tell our own stories, so you can see that we are not here to judge or try to manipulate you. I would like to. Do you want to hear our stories? Understand who we are and why we can understand your situation so easily?" Brooklyn looked at May for a few seconds, trying to process her words, then looked at Gina and Rhonda and nodded vigorously, almost with reverence. "Okay, who wants to start?" May asked, standing up. "I'm going to get myself a fresh hot chocolate." "Gina? Rhonda?" Gina and Rhonda looked at each other, and there was silence for a moment until Gina said with slight irritation, "Okay, I'll get started." No one was surprised that May went into the kitchen at that moment to avoid having to start. It was a typical May move. When May returned to the kitchen, Gina set down her coffee and leaned back in her chair, making herself comfortable. "Well, let's see," she began. "How to get started? I'm Gina Trellis. Used to be Gina Nape, but not anymore. I'm 38. I've been divorced for almost 4 years. I'm a college professor. Not a full professor, more of a secondary professor. I teach adult GED and pre-GED courses. I primarily teach English, although I sometimes teach physical education classes. I spend a lot of time in the gym and have a small side career as a pole dance instructor. Belly, but honestly, most girls want to learn how to spin on a pole without looking stupid." She stopped, smiling shyly. "Yeah, I know, it's a shame. But," she shrugged, "it pays the bills. And you wouldn't believe the body control it takes to be upside down on a pole for 10 minutes. I was married to Scott. He was wonderful," she said with a little wistfulness. "It was wonderful. Everything a marriage should be sounds like yours, Brooke. We met right out of college. Before I met Scott, I was a party girl. I went to parties, met guys, and had relationships with a few of these. Like every girl, I went further. I participated in several sex entertainments, and once at a party where I made several guys, but not as many as the main participant, a girl named Paula, who was dating a guy named Bob. But when I met Scott, all the partying stopped, and I was completely okay with it. No resentment or anything. I walked around, threw my oats around, and saw what was there and was completely okay with it. I wrote it down as a life experience and never thought much about it again. I was already trying to become a teacher, which is a nightmare in this town. I met Scott at a reunion at the University of Illinois. Apparently, he was also an alumnus, just from a different campus. It was love at first sight. I was captivated, and so was he. All these banal and stupid things that people say, it was all true. Hearts, flowers, stars in the eyes, all this. We spent the whole night when we met, talking about how many children we were going to have, where we were going to live, what kind of life we were going to live. Let's choose a religion to educate them. I mean, it sounds very stupid now. We were brought up on all this Disney romance. I thought it was forever, and so was he. By this point, May had returned, having heard Gina's last words. To everyone's surprise, she nodded, agreeing with what Gina was saying. We started dating quickly, lived together after 3 months, and got married after 9. And it was wonderful. So much in common. He was a sports massage therapist. He knew all the buttons to push, I tell you. And yet, as with all things, familiarity, well, it didn't breed contempt, did it? But it did breed complacency. I look back, and I don't know what happened. I was teaching, and there was this guy. You know, there always is. This guy, Gina used her fingers to make a quotation mark. I don't know. Scott worked a lot. The guy was exciting. We didn't have kids, we were both doing well in our careers, and Scott thought we might have to move a few times because of his career and everything else, so we put it off. It was just the two of us. He worked hard, trying to be chosen as a massage therapist for one of our Olympic teams. I started teaching at the gym. This guy, Donnie, worked at the gym as a private trainer. Well, you don't need to imagine. He was hot, strong. He came to my yoga classes to pull himself up. Yes, of course, I had to touch him to do the poses correctly. We were all hot and sweaty. I should have been stronger, but one evening, it just happened. The gym was closing, there was no one there. He asked me about some position, and there he was standing behind me. I can feel his excitement, and then we change places, and I begin to correct him, and I feel his excitement. He gets up and just looks at me, and I look at him, and we start kissing. As you said, Brooke, it suddenly became the most important thing in the world. I still don't understand why. Well, I think it's not difficult to imagine what happened next. The only thing that stopped us for a second was that he ran into the office to turn off the lights and the video recording system, and then we slept on almost every piece of equipment in the room. I never thought about Scott. It was like being in college. Just hot, sweaty sex. No love or long-term relationships, just ships in the night. Well, I justified it later. There was some feeling of guilt, but honestly, not strong. Scott would never know, and that didn't matter to me at all. I ended up sleeping with Donnie 3 or 4 more times over the following weeks, just when the opportunity presented itself. To his credit, he never followed me or bothered me. It was purely if and when there was an opportunity. I think it meant as little to him as it did to me. We were just sex partners and nothing more. You see, that's the whole point. I remember sitting at home and thinking about it one day after the first time with a bottle of wine, deciding to figure out why I did this. When I loved Scott so much, why could I do such a thing? And then it dawned on me, since this was outside of my life with Scott, it had no effect on it. I mean, yes, obviously it's stupid, but at the time it seemed completely logical to me. I didn't love Scott any less. It was just sweaty fun. New sex. Finding out what the new guy likes and doesn't like and what tricks he has. Nothing more. Nothing more. I think I missed the fact that if it was so unimportant, then I shouldn't have a problem with just not doing it. At the time, it made absolutely no difference to my life with Scott. I loved him just as much, even more, because I understood how unique he was and what he meant to me. I slept with someone else and felt nothing other than physical attraction, which was easily satisfied. Of course, it was wrong, but the end result was proof that no one could compare to me and Scott. We were above this kind of emotional deception, and I slept with someone else and proved it to myself. For a moment, all the women sat in silence, sipping their coffee. May stood up and stirred the wood in the dying fireplace, added a couple more logs, and sat back, listening to Gina speak. The women thought about what Gina had said, comparing her statement with their own experiences. But, Gina continued, I obviously didn't think this through. Just because it didn't mean anything to me didn't mean it wouldn't mean anything to someone else. For example, for Scott, or for some other fan. And so it happened. Donnie was purely physical. I think he was attracted to me, but once he got what he wanted, the whole relationship became mechanical. We met a few times, and then he moved to Idaho and didn't look back, and I didn't even bother to say goodbye. This should give you an idea of how unimportant it all was. I felt like I had proven my point. I needed to find some good in what I did, and this was it. I wasn't looking for extra sex on the side, but if it happened, it had absolutely nothing to do with Scott. I still adored him, he adored me, and we still had the same physical connection as before. It's amazing how easy it is to lie to yourself. Now, as I mentioned, I teach at a college. I teach English, specializing in creative writing. A few years after Donnie left, and I had no one but Scott in those years, I was teaching a class, and there was a young author, a poet, actually, who was taking some of my classes. It had already been published and performed well, but, as he put it, success made me realize how much I still didn't know and how much I relied on the editor to correct my commas. He felt that as he became a better storyteller, he was losing his edge as a writer. Interesting, isn't it? So he returned to community college to focus on the mechanics of writing. And that's how I met Leo. He was younger than me, only 23 years old. He was a poet, the kind of poet who reads his works, getting excited in the process. He was good, even very good. Gina looked at the somewhat unsympathetic faces of May, Rhonda, and Brooklyn. Well, he really was, she justified herself, a little hotly. It didn't hurt that it was dark and gothic and interesting. I helped him with vocabulary practice, and one evening, he helped me take off my panties. It was more of curiosity on my part, would the fire and fury of his readings manifest itself in bed. As it turned out, yes, he was good. Persistent, but not too much. Enough experience to have a few tricks I've never seen before. It was great. Good sex. Not loving, but for what it was fine. We had a great time. By that time, I had long overcome the feeling of guilt. I did a great job of convincing myself that if it didn't mean anything to me, then it shouldn't mean anything to anyone else. We slept together 6 or 7 times, and I didn't think much of it. But then he started to get clingy. I really didn't take this into account. He saw much more in our relationship than I did. I should have seen this coming. He was a poet, after all emotion and no logic. I told him it was a purely physical relationship, that I love my husband and he will never replace him, no matter what he thinks. We can have fun, but nothing more. Of course, he didn't listen. I missed the signs. I thought the fact that he wrote a poem about me was cute, but I didn't read it carefully. He waited until the evening reading when he knew Scott would be there with me to read his magnum opus, and at the end he declared his love for me and asked me to leave Scott and become his muse in front of everyone. A real powerful moment, he thought. Scott thought it was all funny until Leo explained that we had already been intimate, and it was the kind of sex the gods talk about. I was caught. Absolutely caught. Scott was furious. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't know Scott could be like this. He overturned the table, large and heavy, to get to Leo, who was suddenly really scared. You could see it in his eyes. It's one thing to stand on stage and excite a crowd of emo fans, but it's another thing entirely to see a very angry husband, who clearly could break you with one hand, try to fight his way through people to get to you and do just that. Gina stopped, breathing heavily. Her eyes were slightly widened, as if she was reliving the episode in her mind. Scott looked at me when Leo made his statement, and I just couldn't even look at him back. He immediately realized that this was true, and I just got mad. He threw one punch at Leo and completely stunned him before everyone pounced on him. They were held while other people took Leo out. They tried to get me to leave, but I was hysterical and couldn't, pushing away a couple of people who tried to get me out. The police arrived, and there were many witnesses, all pointing to Scott. Everything became known. Scott had calmed down a little by then, but he didn't want to talk to me, didn't even look at me. They took him away to process it, and I followed them in our car. He was not released that night, but was released the next day. With Leo gone, there was not enough evidence to keep him longer, and there was no one to press charges against. I'll never forget when it came out. Not shaved, with red eyes, smells bad, and doesn't even look at me. He just got into the car, and we drove home. Not a word was said. I didn't know what to say or do. I tried several times, but he just stopped me with one look. We arrived home, He took out his suitcases, and I knew where this was leading, and I didn't let him leave. I stood at the door, begging him to talk to me. I asked him to hit me or beat me, or yell at me, whatever. But he just stood there, silent, not saying anything other than, "Go away, leave me alone," and the like. It was a dead end. In the end, I realized that I couldn't stop him if he really wanted to leave. I couldn't hold him, so I let him go. I didn't know what else to do. I had to give him time and space to sort out his feelings. The only thing I knew for sure was that we needed to meet and talk so that I could explain that I love him and only him. That all these connections didn't matter. You see, even when faced with the reality that what was nothing to me was everything to Scott, I still couldn't see it through his eyes. I believed more in my own shit than in his reality, which I myself created. There was a pause, and Gina continued. He left, and I didn't see or hear from him for a week. Then I was given a summons at work. I was upset and completely distraught, and they sent me home. I saw him once after that. Once. Can you imagine? I talked him into meeting for dinner so I could explain myself. I was so nervous. It didn't do anything. I didn't know what to say, a lot of the usual phrases. It didn't mean anything. I love only you. We can get through this. I'm so sorry. Well, what else can you say in such circumstances? He made sure that I was financially secure. We sold the house, and I got a small 2-bedroom apartment in Des Plaines. I never found out where he moved. His friends rallied around him, and although they were polite to me, they kept me at a distance. His family? It's better not to talk about this. It wasn't pretty. I haven't received any information about where Scott is or how he's doing. I was beside myself. What should he think? How he must suffer. Gina unconsciously twirled her hair around her finger. She no longer spoke to anyone in particular. She simply spoke to the world. I went to a therapist, the same one we're sending you to, Brooke. She helped me finally understand that I had convinced myself so well that it didn't mean anything, and I truly believe it did, that I didn't even consider what it could mean to someone else. Because if it didn't mean anything to me, then why should it mean anything to anyone else, right? I was so good at justifying myself that I didn't see that I was deliberately ignoring what this could do to Scott. And now I think I did it because I knew what the outcome would be, so I did my best to blind myself from thinking about it. Gina returned to reality and smiled sadly, but ironically, at the other women. You think you can really fill yourself with shit, huh? Brooklyn looked terrible and asked, cautiously, "What happened? Have you explained yourself?" "Oh, I explained myself, or tried to. As I said, when we sat down for dinner, I tried to tell him that I loved him and only him, as events simply confirmed that for me it was a bad line, I can tell you. I explained that this was not a reflection of him. He was wonderful, and I was the one who ruined everything. I did all the usual things. I promised him anything if he would give me another chance. He sat and listened and finally said it was all crap. That if I were happy, I would never cheat. That there must be something wrong in our relationship. Otherwise, I would never have looked for something on the side. I didn't know how to argue with this. There was nothing wrong with our relationship, but I did it anyway. I tried to explain that I was a free spirit in college, but I thought sex was just fun at the time, that's all. It was just like that. He became even more angry. Said, if it meant so little, why did I do it? Why put our marriage at risk for something that meant nothing? This was also a good question. The therapist also doesn't have a good answer to this, other than could, therefore did. This is not a very good answer, even now. Makes me a selfish bastard. And he asked another difficult question. If it was so innocent, why did I hide it from him? Why didn't she tell him and offer him a piece of this nothing on the side? If it was nothing, why hide it? I didn't have an answer to this. But then I put the final nail in the coffin. He asked me casually if Leo was the first. I answered warmly that, of course, yes. I didn't even think about Donnie. The whole experience was so minor, I didn't even think about it. It was many years ago, and I barely remembered it. It wasn't worth mentioning. But somehow, Scott found out about it. I didn't even know that anyone knew about our meetings, of course. I never told anyone, and there was no one there when we were together. Maybe Donnie told me, I don't know. Either way, Scott knew. At least he knew something had happened. The moment he mentioned this, I stopped. I mean, he was right. I didn't even think about this experience when I tried to talk to Scott. It was so insignificant. But again, not for him. He knew right away that I had hidden it, even though I just hadn't thought about mentioning it. Well, that was all. If there was any trust there, it was gone. He just looked at me, said something like, well, if that's how you want it to be, forget it. Then he threw a flash drive with a recording, which I later listened to. Someone at the gym described in detail one of my encounters with Donnie. Apparently, we weren't as alone as I thought. I never saw him in person again. He didn't come to the divorce, only his lawyer did. We split everything, and there were no kids, so that was it. I had no choice. I learned from a friend of a friend that he had moved to San Diego to start over. He moved so far to get away from me and the memories here. I see pictures of him on Facebook every now and then when mutual friends comment on them or something. He looks good, but I know he doesn't want to talk to me. Brooklyn reached out and took Gina's hand. I am so sorry. How are you coping? How do you live day after day? Gina shrugged her shoulders in resignation. I moved on. You must. You can't just lie in your own misery. It took time to deal with loneliness. Finding your place, coping with it all, is distracting. It is only when you are settled that suffering really takes hold of you. I was lucky that I met May, and she helped me move on. You see, it's not that I don't regret everything. I truly regret everything I did, the consequences, the catastrophic consequences. But therapy and May helped me get through it. It's a part of me and always will be, but at some point you have to put aside, woe is me, and start living again. So I sometimes go on dates, and it's funny because there's nothing like dating that makes you realize what you've lost. All the good guys are already married, interested in men, or dead. Sometimes I meet someone decent and we have fun, but I'm pathologically afraid of allowing myself too much happiness. I think I'll just screw it up again, and these guys don't deserve that. I come and talk to May and Rhonda, who understand, and we try to support and comfort those who have made similar mistakes. I miss Scott more than I can say. I miss who he was, who we were together, all the stupid things we did. But I made my choice, and now I am reaping the benefits and trying to cope with it. The best I can do is lead by example and hope that one day I meet another Scott and be in a place where I can accept it, she said with a sigh. Brooklyn inhaled loudly and impulsively hugged Gina, which surprised Gina, but she accepted the hug anyway. Any touch was good for Gina these days. She was surprised how, after leaving the relationship, she missed human contact that wasn't suspicious or didn't demand anything in return. So this is my story. It's terrible and doesn't have a happy ending yet, but at least it proves that life goes on. Okay, I need more coffee. Rhonda, it's your turn. Gina stood up, more to fight off the oncoming tears than for any other reason. Rhonda, desperate to change the tense atmosphere, said cheerfully, well, Gina, I loved the sex I had. And just like that, Brooklyn and May smiled, and Gina even chuckled a little. So, what's your story? Brooklyn asked, really interested. She began to relax around these women and not feel judged. She was among equals. Dubious equality, of course, but still equal. Oh, Rhonda said, waving her hand and dismissing the question. My husband and I became interested in exchanging partners. It was fun. Everything got out of control. He somehow stayed away. That's all. There was silence, and May, raising the hot chocolate to her mouth, simply looked at Rhonda. Rhonda stared back, definitely. May pursed her lips and was about to say something when Rhonda gave up. Oh, okay, she whispered, looking at the floor in disgust. Okay, my history. Fine, if you don't want to, Brooklyn said, extending her hand towards Rhonda. No, May is right. We have to. We have to do this. It's just hard. How to rip off a bandage from a wound that has not yet completely healed. The women waited while Rhonda gathered her courage. Okay, so? Yes. Well, I'm Rhonda Frey, Finnish by birth and upbringing. I came to America as an exchange student when I was 17 and went to Northwestern University. So I got an education visa and stayed here, and I love this place. I love Chicago. I love America. I'm a citizen now, you know. I will never return to Finland, a land of eternal sun for half the year and eternal darkness the rest of the time. It's cold and disgusting. Here you can be free and go from sun to snow in an hour. Beaches everywhere, lots of things to do. This is amazing. And the men, oh men, I can ride a different cowboy every day. Everyone smiled at this. Her enthusiasm was infectious. When I was in my last year of college, I was studying engineering. And let me tell you girls, if you want to be pampered, go into engineering. All these men and no options for them. There just aren't many hot female engineers out there. I know it's mean to say, but I was Miss January and February and March. You understand. In general, in my last year, I met Jocelyn. Oh, how simple I was then, with a small worldview. But he, Jocelyn, was so experienced, so knowledgeable, so I am able to be comfortable in any environment. He was a man of the world, and I just followed him. It was wonderful. His parents had money, and he had a trust. He wasn't super rich, but he wasn't worried about his next paycheck either. He was a connector. It was strange. He didn't so much make deals as he brought together people who made deals, and he received part of the benefits for these acquaintances. His family was well known in Chicagoland, and he had access to everyone, and he could do this across social boundaries. He was as comfortable in a South Side bar as he was in Fleming's Steakhouse, and he took me with him. It was exciting. I met him at a college fundraiser. Having a beautiful engineering student is never a bad idea, and from the moment we met, we had a connection. I learned a lot from him. My world and my brain expanded. It was a whirlwind of romance. Just like in the movies, he was kind to me, attentive, explained all the things I didn't know about this country. Well, I'm sure you understand where this was going. We got married 10 months from the day we met. My parents came from Finland and hated America at first sight, but they smiled and endured for my sake. We were patient, Gina inserted with a smile. What? Rhonda asked. It would be more correct to say endured. Past tense. They didn't tolerate it. Sorry, English teacher. I can't help but fix it. Rhonda simply looked at Gina a little longer than necessary and continued. Yes, they endured for me. She used her fingers to make quotes. Gina picked up her coffee and smiled in greeting. 13 years in this country, and she still has to correct me. Rhonda rolled her eyes. Gina's smile grew even wider. Anyway, Rhonda said sarcastically, we got married. It was good, great sex, jacuzzi in the house, lots of nudity, as it should be. I gave birth to a couple of children, like a good wife should. We have a boy, Xander, and a girl, Lena. We raised them correctly. You Americans are such prudes about nudity. There's a lot of fuss about one breast on a football halftime show, but is it okay when people get beheaded on a primetime show? Such hypocrisy. So Joss and I did the opposite. Our children saw us naked, and we taught them that it was natural, like in our home. We tried not to impose on them all this stupid religious morality that is so much in this country. Everything was great for about 4 or 5 years, and then everything started to slow down. You know how it goes. Children interfere with everything. I love my children, but it was like living their life and not my own. Joss and I stopped having sex as often. He had more things to do, and he was often away organizing some big deal. Brooklyn bit her lip as she looked at Rhonda. Rhonda noticed and was outraged. No, that's not true. I didn't climb into bed with another man while he was working. He came back, the deal was done, and we talked. I mean, we actually talked. About what we want, how our life has ceased to be exciting. We could talk to each other, you know, whenever you wanted. We both accepted that life wasn't that exciting, and we both wanted to fix it. So we talked. Rhonda was silent for a moment, nostalgia in her eyes. Then she shook herself and continued. Basically, we wanted to bring some excitement back into our lives. So we started talking about fantasies. I knew some of him, but I don't think Taylor Swift would ever agree to sleep with him. We started talking about our relationship, how strong it was, and what we could do to make it through. I knew he wanted a threesome with another woman. Well, that's not what they all want, right? All the women smiled and nodded. We were talking about it. How can this happen? And I mentioned that if he gets a threesome with a woman, what about me? Will I get sex with another man? How will he react to this? I wasn't scared of the other woman at all. I had already had experience with women in college, so I knew I could handle it. What about him? We had long discussions about what we could do, what would be okay and what wouldn't, and so on. And oh God, how we had sex later. When we talked about it, it excited both of us. And we had sex. I remember this. It wasn't love, we just did it. I should have seen this. Should have realized what that meant. I'm an engineer, damn it. I am logical and can see where one thing leads. But I missed this big moment. That's the right word, right? Big moment. So we finally agreed to give it a try. We'll go to the club where they exchange partners and see what's going on there. So we found one in the northern suburbs called the Adventure Club. It's run by a very nice couple. We emailed them, and they invited us to an orientation. Apparently, they wanted to make sure that we were a couple, that I wasn't forced, and that we understood what we were getting into. A lot of lectures about how no means no, you know. And then we went to a party that Saturday. We left the children with his parents and went there. It was interesting. Big old house, basement made like a nightclub, upstairs rooms with mattresses. About what you'd expect. That first night we just watched. We talked to several people, received invitations to hang out, as they say, but declined. Watching others have sex was very exciting. The next day we spent the entire day in bed until we had to pick up the kids at 5. By then we were simply exhausted. Going to this place definitely brought back the spark, at least for a while. Of course, eventually we started talking about coming back and maybe getting involved. We talked about this over and over again. We came up with rules for ourselves and tried to imagine all possible situations. It was good because we discussed things we hadn't talked about in years. They really opened up, well, to some extent. I mean, how do you tell your husband you like the idea without making him angry? She then took another sip of her hot chocolate with a little sparkle in her eyes and winked at Brooklyn, who was looking at her with her mouth open in surprise. There was a dull silence as Gina and Rhonda tried to keep straight faces, avoiding each other's gaze in case they laughed. Anyway, Rhonda said eventually, trying to get the conversation back on track, so to speak. We talked, and we decided to go again and probably participate. Did you know that they divide the rooms into different stages? Brooklyn looked away from May and turned back to Rhonda, giving May another quick glance, still in awe of the elegant woman's knowledge, but also wanting to hear more about the real life in such clubs in Chicago. It was so spicy. We agreed that the children would go to his parents again in a month, and we went again. We were approached a few times, and we met one couple, Sandy and Dan, like in Greece. They were very nice. They realized that this was something new for us, and they introduced us slowly. They took us into a public room, and we watched several couples having sex. It was so exciting. After exhaling, she looked at the other women, a little embarrassed. That was hot, okay? I mean, it was overwhelming. It was my first time doing something like this. There were people having sex all around us. It was wild. Of course, I didn't think about what happened next. Rhonda looked down, her face losing some color, the hot memories replaced by something else. Sandy helped me up, and we went to one of the private rooms. And there, well, we all had sex. I mean hot sex. It was. I really enjoyed it, I must admit. To be with a man and woman who give you their full attention. I didn't even think about Joss, to be honest. He sat there and looked at it all. I just got into a rhythm doing things I'd never done before. I looked up and saw his face and knew this wasn't going to end well. He just got up and walked away, leaving me there. I hurried to get dressed and caught up with him when he was already leaving. He didn't say a word. He just left the club, found our car in the parking lot, and we drove home. I wish I could say we were yelling at each other, but we weren't. We didn't have sex to the point of exhaustion either. We were just silent. I honestly didn't know what to say. He was there too. He could have stopped it at any moment. He let it happen too. After about 3 days of the kids making noise, we finally talked. I mean, he was angry, as you can imagine. Every man dreams of having two women, and the first time someone else gets it. And I didn't even think about it. So, to appease him, and I really knew I had gone too far, I made another huge mistake. I told him we would go again, and this time it would be all about him. I honestly meant it. If that couple could do it to us, we could do it to someone else. This calmed him down a little, and I think he was even looking forward to returning. I knew I was waiting. So after a couple of weeks, we did it. And then we realized how difficult it is to arrange this. We ended up doing it at home. Another terminology is when you have sex with someone you came with. And it was. Well, it was good. I mean, it was pretty hot. We were both getting excited. But it ended, and then we went downstairs, and to be honest, I was still horny. After a couple of songs, they made it clear that they wanted to have fun with me. I kept looking for Joss, and finally I saw him sitting and talking to some lady. I thought he might be okay. I caught his eye and looked at him pleadingly, and he just looked away, so I thought, what the hell? And I went with these guys, and it was mind-blowing. That night, when we returned home, we had a serious conversation. He will never return there again. He was so angry at me, and I just took it out on him. He didn't return for 3 days. I called him and left messages, but I didn't know where he was. Eventually, he returned. He was walking with friends. Our relationship was never the same again. Every time there was intimacy, it felt like someone else was there. I didn't dare bring up the subject of going back there. He would have exploded at me. I knew I was walking on thin ice, so I just left it at that. It took a while, but things were mostly back to normal. It was his birthday, and I arranged a room at the Drake Hotel and bought some sexy lingerie, and I think he liked it. I was very careful. I didn't want to bring up any bad images in his head. So everything was fine until Halloween. We had a tradition. We always went trick-or-treating with the kids in his parents' neighborhood. They live in Palatine, and their area is huge for this kind of thing. This is where everyone goes on Halloween. Not much in our area. And then they stayed with their grandparents, ate all the candy, because grandparents do that easily, and we went to the party. We could go to Rush and Division, or to some party at someone's house. Somewhere with costumes. We were very creative with our costumes. And this year, Joss was supposed to go on a business trip. He was organizing financing for some TV show and was supposed to be in Los Angeles for Halloween. And I sat there, wondering what I should do. The children would be happy with their grandparents, and I would be left alone. And I did something so monstrously stupid. I got dressed and went to the sex club. Halloween is a huge party for these clubs, even more than New Year. I thought, Joss will never know, and I'll get some of that amazing sex, and no one will be upset this time. I look back on that decision and think, how stupid could I have been? Things were starting to look up with Joss and I, but I couldn't stop thinking about how hot it was there, and I wanted more. But I didn't want Joss to be mad at me, and this seemed like the easiest way to do it. No one gets hurt. I wasn't looking for love. Like Gina, I completely separated sex from any relationship. I could go there, have fun, and not even remember these guys' names a couple of days later, and that was okay. So there was no risk of any consequences for me. At least that's what I thought. So I dressed up. I put on makeup, put on white stockings and belts, and white high-heeled shoes, red lipstick and hair in 2 ponytails. I went as my husband's fantasy. Can you believe it? How stupid is that? All the things my husband loves are for other people. I should have been shot at birth. Anyway, I went. It was great. I had a great time. I drank a lot, flirted with everyone, and had sex about 4 times that night. I got my dose and went home at 4 a.m. And so it went on. Every couple of months I found a way to go alone. I made sure that Joss was well off. All was good until everything collapsed. Rhonda took a sip. All 3 other women looked at her intently. One evening, Joss was at some golf event that was supposed to be in Milwaukee, and he stayed overnight. I went and had fun as always. I even saw Sandy and Dan that evening and talked to them about our first night, asking them if they did what they did on purpose. You know, couples who excel at partner exchanges are usually the most amazing people. It takes a very strong relationship to survive what you do. Anyway, I asked them, and they just shrugged and said that in their experience, everything balances out. One night is a big deal for one partner, and the other just goes with it. And another night, it's a big deal for the other. They don't keep score, they just support each other, and everything balances out. Then they asked me where Joss was, and I had to change the subject. Long story short, there was another couple there that night that I didn't know and had only met briefly. But they knew me, and they knew Joss, and when they noticed me flirting, they couldn't believe it. They told Joss, of course. He didn't come back from Milwaukee for a week, and I didn't know he found out about what I was doing. He just said he had business. When he got back, he hired a private detective who found out from the club records that I was there, obtained written statements from witnesses, and somehow got some of the people I was hanging out with to make statements. When I was served with a summons the day after he returned, I simply lost consciousness. Just an affair. I saw Dan and Sandy one more time. They were the ones who explained to me how badly I had hurt Joss. By then, everything was known. I ran into them at TGI Fridays, of all places. I went there to meet someone then, and they were sitting at the bar, watching hockey. I sat down with them, and they talked a little about what I was doing, going to the club alone, and how their conversation with me about balance was incomprehensible to me. That it doesn't matter much were based on balance, you know. It doesn't matter unless there is balance when both sides are balanced, and in our case, it never was. I just made the debt worse. I didn't even think about it. I just thought that when we went there, he wasn't interested, he wasn't involved, but I still found it exciting. The thing is, as my therapist pointed out, I knew it was not what I was supposed to do, even if I denied his influence. I knew it, otherwise I would have said something, but I never said anything. Rhonda's pronunciation became clearer, sharper, and her vowels became more accentuated as she spoke. The more emotions washed over her, the more the American accent disappeared from her speech. After I was served with the summons, Joss showed up one day and just took all his stuff out of the house. He moved to Minneapolis. He was humiliated, and so was his family. Remember, they're famous people here in Chicago. He didn't have a choice, actually. He became a business professor at the University of Minneapolis. He took the kids, too. I mean, he had expensive lawyers that his family knew as friends. And I hung out at a sex club. It wasn't a fair fight, and I knew it. I see the kids one weekend a month, every other holiday, and 6 weeks in the summer. But I still have a lot of Skype relationships with them. I deserve it. There was silence as the women digested the latest story. Funny, I've had sex since the club scene is still exciting, but I don't do it here anymore. In Indiana, Milwaukee, even California, but not here. And I date, have sex with some guys, but I just can't have a permanent relationship anymore. Like Gina, I can't accept a man for long. I compare them to Joss, everything he did for me, the connection we had, the way we laughed together, the new experiences we had. He opened up for me. It's just not right. I miss him so much. I miss the life I had. We were a real family. I'm so sorry, Brooklyn said, genuinely touched by Rhonda's story. Like Gina before her, she reached out to touch Rhonda's arm. Rhonda put her hand on Brooklyn's and said, "It's okay. It's my fault. We're all to blame. We just have to learn to accept it and move on. One day I can. Until then, a lot of meaningless sex with attractive men for me." The last words were spoken with false courage, but it relieved the tension of the moment. Then, hesitantly, Rhonda said, "Do you want to know the weirdest thing? Even though we're divorced, we still sleep together sometimes. When he's in town, he calls, and we meet at his hotel, and we just have sex. It took a while. But now this is happening. He even asked if I continue to go to the club, and I told him the truth that I do it sometimes. And he asked about what I was doing. It was not for excitement, just out of curiosity. I'll tell you girls, if I could persuade him to come with me again, I would make him the happiest person in the world. Then she added, well, there's no harm in dreaming anyway. I just want him there with me. I think it wasn't the fact that we went to the sex club. It was the way I behaved there. It was all so new. I went too far and destroyed his faith and trust in me. If I hadn't messed up, if that second time we had a threesome, I think it would be life. I would be completely different now. There was a note of longing in Rhonda's voice, and then, after a pause, she shrugged and said, Joka menete muesteli side tickle silmian. Brooklyn looked at Rhonda, not understanding anything. Finnish proverb. It means a stick in the eye of those who remember the past. Uo, Gina said, as if she understood what Rhonda was talking about. Let's take a drink break. I'm sure the coffee pot needs some attention, May said, standing up from her chair. She picked up the coffee pot and walked into the kitchen, humming to herself. Gina looked at Rhonda and said quietly, Do you think she'll tell? Everything. I don't know, Rhonda replied. Brooklyn looked at them both, confused. What? Is she going to tell her story? That's what I asked. We've heard bits and pieces, but never the whole story. Honestly, neither of us have the guts to ask her. She has a way of telling off, you know. In the most polite way of saying fuck you, Gina said. What do you know? Brooklyn asked. There was a long history of cheating. It got out. Bad things happened. That's all. Well, that's about right, I think, said a voice from behind them. May returned with an updated coffee pot. Gina's eyes looked at Rhonda in panic. Well, isn't that nice? May said, in the most kindly way, but looking at Gina and Rhonda in such a way that their intentions could not be misunderstood. Rhonda and Gina stared at the floor and the coffee pot respectively, avoiding eye contact. So, May, what's your story? Brooklyn asked, turning towards her innocently. My history, said May in a quiet, thoughtful voice. Well, yeah, I think it's time. I've never told anyone here everything. Parts, maybe. Snippets. Those parts that I chose to share, but maybe the time has come. Opening the soul is good for the soul, as I was told. She smiled at Brooklyn sincerely and then said softly, Yes, and those two who didn't have the courage to ask properly can listen too. Gina and Rhonda looked up and looked at each other. Gina was now smiling widely, like a teenager caught doing something she wasn't too ashamed of. Rhonda grinned back and leaned over to refill her coffee cup. Is everyone settled? Yes. Okay, May said, settling into her chair. So let me tell you about Randall. To my Randall. My God, this man was everything to me. We met in 1975. He had just returned from Cambodia, where he was a young Marine in the embassy. Everyone was evacuated when the Khmer Rouge took Phnom Penh, the capital of the country. She saw Brooklyn, Gina, and Rhonda not understanding. It doesn't matter ancient history. Suffice it to say, he was a young Marine and oh so handsome. He was with a friend, Ronnie Cordell. I knew Ronnie from school. He was a football star, so everyone knew Ronnie. He became friends with Randall while he was serving, and Randall returned with him on leave. We were at a dance. Well, at a disco, actually. That's how it was at that time. I was never really interested, but my friends loved to dance, and the Bee Gees and Donna Summer were into it. I was a nurse then. I met Randall at some club, I don't remember which one in Champaign-Urbana, where I lived, and I was smitten at first sight. I can tell you what he was wearing, what I was wearing. I can even tell what song was playing. It was Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. He was wearing jeans, boots, and a plaid shirt, and I was wearing a yellow summer dress. She paused, looking into the distance, remembering the glory days of yore. He was so handsome. He stood there with a beer in his hand, and I just looked at him. Then Ronnie came over and said hello and introduced me to Randall, and I stuttered and mumbled, and he took pity on me and asked me to dance. It was heavenly. He was heavenly. I didn't know that it was him I was waiting for, but it was so. That night I realized that I would marry him. We had 4 dates and no sex, thank you, and then he left for work again. He wrote to me every other day and called me whenever he could. He came home for every leave. His unit was in Georgia, at the base where he was a security guard. On the fourth dismissal, he proposed to me, and I said yes before he could finish the question. A year later, he resigned and moved to Urbana to be with me, and we began our life together. I lived with him even in the 70s. This was not very common for women of my upbringing, as my mother said, but I wanted him so much that I did it. We got married a year later, and it was bliss. Simply the best day. Not like today's wedding, small, just our friends, and such a wonderful night. Perfect temperature, not too long, no drunken uncles, just perfect. And the night, oh my God, this man knew how to love. I wasn't a virgin. It was the 70s. Burning bras, and all that meant there was a lot of experimentation. I was aware and researched it a bit. I knew the difference between a confident lover and someone who was just wandering around. Or worse, a confident lover whose confidence was misplaced. It's the worst, you know. And thank God, Randall was confident for all the right reasons. Looking back, I don't even know why we waited. I think it was misplaced chivalry, and an attempt on my part to be like my parents' generation, with the man I really loved. I look at today's kids and the way they jump in and out of bed before marriage, and I can't help but think it's a healthier approach to know you're sexually compatible with your partner before committing to marriage. Is it simply a better solution? Agree? She fell silent again, remembering. He was so kind to me and I to him. We just understood each other, you know. It was a match made in heaven. I gave him what he needed, and he gave me what I needed. Everything worked out for us. He became the owner of the building he managed, and then bought several more. By the time we became one, we owned 2 apartment buildings, 3 office buildings, and 3 parking lots, plus 4 duplexes and our own house. We moved after 8 years of marriage to a much better place. There was an indoor pool, even a pool house. Everything is very chic and la-di-da, as they say. Our 4th of July parties were the talk of the town. I went into politics when the children grew up. I was bored and quit medicine when Ellie was born. Randall supported me and even helped fund my first campaign for city council. And then, unexpectedly, I ran for mayor, and she won, sort of. That is, I was chosen. It was an amazing time, girls. Like I said, anything seemed possible. And it was, right up to the very end. There was a quiet moment as May frowned and Rhonda and Gina fidgeted with impatience, and Brooklyn sat transfixed. Well, it was Randall. He was everything to me. That's why it's so hard to talk about Dexter. May looked at the other women doubtfully, wondering if she was actually being smart. I'm going for a walk, just like that, she thought. They have already opened their souls. And continued. So Dexter, he was everything that Randall was not. Or rather, Randall was everything that Dexter was not. Randall was reliable and firm. Dexter was frivolous and fickle. Randall was the epitome of devotion. Dexter ran from commitment like the plague. Randall thought about his actions, and Dexter, if an idea came to his mind, immediately embodied it. Randall had a calm, slow sense of humor, while Dexter found everything wildly funny and made fun of everything. Randall worked hard and long for everything he had, but for Dexter everything came easy and went away just as easily. One day he had thousands of dollars, and the next he owed thousands. I think you girls know what I mean. He wasn't so much a bad guy as he was a big kid. But he was fun, and for some reason we just couldn't leave each other alone. I met him before Randall, and we had a whirlwind romance for 3 or 4 months. This could never be a full-fledged relationship. That became clear to me very quickly. Dexter wasn't just a scatterbrained man. He had a wandering eye, a wandering hand, and a lack of maturity or conscience. And honestly, after 2 or 3 days of his company, you just wanted to talk to an adult. But there was something about him, like a wounded bird. You just couldn't help but want to take care of him and make him laugh. When I met Randall, I hadn't seen Dexter for months. I knew right away who Randall was. He was my soulmate. But Dexter, he looked like my jolly buddy, you know. He would show up for weeks. We would find time to be together. Sometimes we would be physical. Sometimes we would just drink. I just couldn't resist him. Even after we got married, this continued. Like you ladies, I knew exactly who fed me and where my home was, so Dexter was just a little digression, like a bad habit. He knew he had no chance of having a full-on relationship with me like a real couple, but he would show up after 8 months in Paris or something, call me, and we would meet for coffee and then spend a couple of hours discussing the news. You mean you had sex, right, May? Gina said with some sourness. Here was May, the matriarch, and she was finally admitting that she was human. Gina couldn't help but feel some satisfaction. May sighed. If you mean we were physically intimate, then yes, it happened. Dexter was wildly creative. Randall was less so. I mean, if someone told him about something, he'd try it. But he wasn't someone who looked at a hairbrush and thought, I wonder how we can use this as a sex toy. Dexter, on the other hand, already had stories about what he could and couldn't do with her. Randall was not boring, and I don't mean to make it sound like that he always satisfied me without a doubt. He could leave me smeared on the bed. But Dexter, you never knew what he would do next. This went on for years. He was like my other husband who was away often. He came, told me stories about where he was, what he did, who he was with. He was never shy about telling me about other women. But then he'd say, but none of them were you, May, and then he'd kiss me, and I'd just smile at his audacity. I did not care. He was not mine, and I was not his. I had my man at home. Dexter was just so comfortable. I think that's the right word. He even gave me a ring. Inside was the inscription, always here, waiting, which I thought at the time was unusually insightful for Dexter. I wore it on my right hand, on the same finger as my wedding ring. It's all very stupid, I know. Stupid, called Gina, instantly becoming bolder. It wasn't stupid, it was outrageous. Tag you with my sign, and wear it. It takes courage, May. May simply looked at Gina calmly and then said, stuttering, yes, you're right. I should never have done this. I knew what it meant, what it symbolized. I shouldn't have even considered the idea. But I had the stupid thoughts of a woman who had everything. A husband to whom she is devoted and a lover who satisfies her desires. It was pure arrogance and lack of thought on my part. Luckily, Randall never suspected anything. There was another silence as the other women tried to comprehend the gravity of what May had done. A long-term betrayal of the man she claimed to love with all her heart. It was hard to comprehend. They were weak, but that was intentional. For many years. Going back to the story, when he was in town, we would find ways to meet sometimes at his house. Or if Randall was in Chicago, 2 of our buildings were in Chicago, he would come to our house and sneak into the pool house on the back side. I never brought him to the main house that was Randall and I's place, not his. You know what's the funniest thing? Dexter was so far away from my main life with Randall and the kids that I never even felt much guilt about our time together. I mean, it was what I've always done. Randall never suffered from it. Dexter was like an old friend with whom he sometimes became physically intimate. I never even thought much about it. He was like old slippers or a favorite hairdresser. But we really had fun. I learned a few things that I've always tried to bring into my relationship with Randall. We did some crazy stuff that just confirmed that I didn't like it. I'm not going to go into detail. Others here are more comfortable saying things like that than I am, she said, raising an eyebrow at Rhonda, who just looked at her serenely. A woman has to maintain some mystery, I guess, but I'll say that tying up is not for me. Like all these humiliations and insults. If I'm there, I'm a full partner in what's going on, not some little girl who's being ordered around. And when Dexter brought another man, I kicked them both out, and Dexter didn't show up for almost a year. I have my own standards. Or I thought I had them, she said quietly after a pause. The thing is, when you basically get away with everything for years, you stop thinking about what you're doing, about the impact this will have. It's been a part of your life for so long that it seems normal. You stop thinking that this is something wrong, even if you try not to let anyone know. You stop thinking about why you arrange things this way, and it just becomes part of your life. It's what you do. I had this life, a public position, my main man by my side, a love that would never end, and some fun with an old friend who absolutely no one knew about and who was not a threat to all of this. But he was still there. Public position. It's a strange thing. I was ready for it when the opportunity presented itself. I was the Republican candidate when the Republican Party still stood for something other than big business, religious bigotry, and hypocrisy. Given that we owned buildings, were known in the community, were involved in community service, we were respected, I think. Well, no wonder they came to me. I was already on the city council and had some success trying to fix the public school system in Urbana, so I had experience. When the local party approached me, I was not very surprised. Randall was overjoyed, and I was proud and honored too. We just decided together that this is something we can do. I could do this job, and it was a way to serve the community, leaving a legacy beyond our children, even though they were so important to us. And we went for it. The party and Randall created a fund to finance my re-election campaign, and we got down to business energetically. I spent my time kissing babies and shaking hands, sometimes even mixing them up. Gina smiled at the weak joke, and Rhonda just watched, not understanding the humor. Brooklyn was fascinated by May's story. It was a long and hard journey. Late nights, lots of decisions I really had no right to make. Money was spent on leaflets, events, advertising, and campaigners. We held bring-your-own-food dinners and $100 a plate nights, fundraisers, and I showed up all over town helping out in soup kitchens and anything else that needed attention. It was hard work. Halfway through the campaign, Dexter reappeared, having returned from Hong Kong, where he had been hauling equipment for some group. The late nights weren't just on the campaign trail. Several of them were spent in his motel room or pool house. I made sure that I spent a lot more time at home taking care of Randall. But I didn't take the other party into account. They wanted the mayor's post and were not shy about using dishonest methods to achieve this. I didn't know that they were digging into my past, looking for dirt. Fortunately, my past was clean. Well, except for Dexter, but honestly, he was like furniture to me. But besides him, no one knew about our ongoing relationship. I didn't share it with anyone, and I don't think he did either. It wasn't anything special. Of course, that didn't stop them. When they didn't find anything in my past, they simply redoubled their efforts. I was being followed. And that's when everything fell apart. I won the election, but before I could take office, a newspaper article appeared questioning the morality of the new mayor. If she cheats on her husband, what will she do in office? I was devastated. They had pictures of me meeting Dexter, some unflattering images that were censored. There was no real way to deny it. This was the end of my tenure as mayor. I resigned before taking office. The city council had to choose a new mayor. What a mess. But everything that happened with my career was nothing compared to what happened with my relationships. Randall was destroyed. I saw him one day at home after the article was published. He was desperate. He asked me if it was true, and I couldn't even look him in the eye, at least without blinking. He immediately realized that this was true. I muttered something. I tried to minimize the damage, to make him understand how little it meant, how he was my man, my beloved king. Gina and Rhonda looked at each other. Only May could use the word beloved to describe the death of her marriage. I said something really stupid in my desperation, something like, "This has been going on as long as we've been married. Have you ever felt for 1 second that I wasn't 100% with you?" It was one of the dumbest things I've ever said. Randall was even more crushed. I expected him to scream, break things, maybe even hit me, and I would have accepted it and asked for more. But he didn't do any of this. He was too good a man for that. I should have known. He just stood there, shaking, tears streaming down his face. He seemed to have deflated. I went over to hug him, as I had done many times throughout our marriage, to make things better. But he didn't want it. He retreated, and I realized that he did not want physical contact with me, which was very painful. I was aware of the damage I had done, but when I came face to face with it, it was terrible. He just turned and walked upstairs, and I followed him, trying to explain how much I loved him and only him, how this long-term romance only strengthened my feelings for him. May raised her eyebrows, looking at the other women self-deprecatingly. Yes, I did try to explain that a 30-year romance was good for our marriage. I'm sure you ladies said the same stupid things when the relationship came out. This speaks of desperation, panicky attempts to stop the catastrophe. We've all been there. It didn't look good. I cried and was ready to do or say anything to make things right. It's funny when we say that we will do everything to fix everything. Remember when Diana said this to Ryan and he asked, "What would you do to make things right?" No answer, right? But I offered, thinking that I could. But this was not fate. Randall packed his things military guys know how to pack quickly and just walked past me. I sobbed and collapsed in the doorway of our bedroom. I tried to grab his leg as he walked by, but he just kept walking. I honestly don't know who cried harder, me or him. He disappeared in the blink of an eye. Well, I don't need to tell you how bad things went for me after that. As I said, I resigned over the phone, apologizing to local party leaders. They didn't tell me much other than the resignation has been accepted. I asked them to tell the press, which they did. I didn't leave the house for the next few days. The kids all contacted me and Cameron came to visit the next day. He was in Chicago at the time. He was only concerned about me, and I could barely be intelligible to him. He didn't even ask about the affair. He was just concerned about my well-being. Ellie and Ezra arrived later in the week. However, by that time, what I had done had become known. There were no details, of course they didn't know that it was a long-term affair. At first, the children were comforting and just plain worried. And then, one after another, they grew cold. They visited their father, and he told them the details, such as the duration. Apparently, he also started researching this novel, found Dexter, and Dexter told his side in full and in detail after threats from very big people. Then he ran away, far away. I never expected anything different from him. Dexter always cared more about himself than anything else. So Randall knew everything, or at least everything that Dexter said. I tried to contact him many times, called, left messages, wrote to him. Text messages were a new thing at the time, but Randall was always modern, wrote him letters, sent them through the office. When I called his office, his secretary Tracy simply said that he was not there, and that he had left instructions that he would not be there. I had no idea where he lived. In a hotel, in one of the apartments in our buildings. I didn't know. May took a deep breath, reliving these very emotional memories. As it turned out, the children also didn't hear about him for a long time. Ezra thought that Randall had gone somewhere to heal his wounds. Ellie and Cameron were sure that he would contact them when he recovered from the shock. But that did not happen. There was complete silence. Only the sound of the clock grew louder as the women listened to May's every word. The sound of a pin hitting the floor would have sounded like a gong at that moment. She looked at them, trying to smile, but the smile hid the pain and emotions seething in her eyes. Randall died 4 days before our 30th anniversary, 5 days after he found out what I was doing. Brooklyn sighed slightly from across the table, and Gina and Rhonda were stunned as well. "I'm so sorry, May," Gina said automatically, searching for words. "Yeah, sorry for your loss," Rhonda added. Brooklyn just sat there with her hand over her mouth in shock, her eyes watering. They found Randall's body at a local Marriott 4 days after the last day Cameron spoke to him. He was dead for 2 days. It was a massive heart attack brought on by stress, the coroner said. Apparently his heart enlarged and simply failed, and then stopped, and he died almost immediately. That's what they said at the inquest. But I knew better. I knew what Randall died from. It was a broken heart, and I broke it. May's voice trembled at the last sentence, and she began to look for a napkin among the coffee utensils on the table so that the other women would not see the tears in her eyes. She found one and looked up to see the other woman turning away in deference to her feelings. She dabbed her eyes and then said, "It's okay, ladies. I'm just stupid and emotional." Suddenly, it was Brooklyn who leaned over and said, her voice shaking with sympathy, "May, this is completely normal and understandable. If you've never told this story before, may I say it's about time. You need to decompress, just like we do." Gina and Rhonda looked at each other and raised their eyebrows. This newcomer showed resilience that neither of them expected. Her empathy was amazing and sincere. Just 4 days before our 30th anniversary, 4 days, the kids and I were planning a big party, celebrating my victory in the mayoral election and our anniversary all together. This statement was again followed by dead silence, and it was 2 days before his birthday. Jesus, Gina whispered. Damn it, Rhonda said quietly. Brooklyn just sat there, stunned. And I killed him. As far as I'm sitting here, he died of shock because of what I did and continued to do. Nobody knew what to say to this. Complete denials would be obvious as self-deception. Finally, Gina tried, carefully saying, May, you can't know that for sure. If his heart was enlarged, chances are he already had problems. May just looked at her sadly and said, maybe, but he got a shock and it killed him, and I was responsible for that shock. I don't think there's anything to argue about here, and I will have to live with this knowledge. What I did, what I continued to do, not only destroyed my marriage, but also killed the most precious thing I had in my life, my husband. This killed a kind and wonderful man, and I live with it every day. Everyone just sat there thinking about this whole terrible thing for a moment, and then May continued, well, of course I couldn't stay in Champaign-Urbana. I became a social pariah, for obvious reasons. My sisters barely speak to me, a birthday call, a card at Christmas, no invitations for Thanksgiving, as you might guess. I moved here as soon as I could and bought this house. In the end, everything from our life together turned out to be mine, the business, the buildings, everything. I became a very rich woman. But children, well, children. It wasn't fair. I had betrayed Randall throughout our marriage and didn't deserve any of this. So I took a small amount from the business to survive and gave the rest to them. They could run it or sell it or do whatever they wanted. It was their inheritance, not mine. What Gina and Rhonda didn't know was the extent of what May and Randall owned when he died. The entire estate after taxes amounted to almost $15 million. May took $2 million and gave the rest to the children. Even now, having paid cash for the house she lived in, she was still a relatively wealthy woman. And very quietly, she created an educational trust for Rhonda's children. They won't know it until they get to college, but neither of them will graduate with debt. And the trust was created in her husband's name. Still, they don't talk to me much. Cameron tolerates my presence for the sake of his children. I spoil my 2 grandchildren from him, or at least as much as I'm allowed. But they don't stay with me. I think they think I'm a bad influence, and they're probably right. Quite understandable. Ellie talks to me and sometimes comes to visit. She's still single, and I think she has a new boyfriend. She's mentioned him a few times, but we're not as close as we used to be. But Ezra, my sweet boy, I never hear from him. He told me at the funeral that to him I died for what I did, and he more than proved that he would keep that word. I heard from others that he got married and had 2 children, but I have never seen them and probably never will. But despite all my problems with my children, what I regret most is that I was not able to apologize to Randall properly. He died never knowing that he was my knight in shining armor, that everything I ever told him was the absolute truth. I loved him completely. Dexter was just fun. A time when I could be someone other than Mrs. Randall Morgan, even if I loved being her. Dexter was like a beloved pet, and Randall never knew or understood that. I destroyed the best thing I had in my life, and now I have this. She pointed to the other women sitting in her living room. Don't get me wrong, ladies, I'm grateful for it. Believe me. But if I had to trade you for Randall, it wouldn't be a hard decision, I can tell you that. Gina chuckled softly, Rhonda smiled slightly, and even Brooklyn chuckled sadly. They could understand they would have made the same choice. The only reason I'm telling this story now, despite these 2 witches trying to get it out of me, Brooklyn said, waving her hand at Gina and Rhonda, who feigned outrage, is because Dexter died last week. I received a message from an old high school friend in Urbana. I was wondering whether to go to the funeral or not, but I decided that it was better not to go. Dexter has already taken enough from me, or rather, I've already given him enough. I need to give Randall's memory some credit, and me showing up at Dexter's funeral wouldn't have sent the right message. It's not much, but it's all I can do. She took one last sip of her, now cold hot chocolate, winced, and hastily put it aside. So, that's the whole story. Now, Brooklyn, I hope you understand that we understand your situation. We are not going to justify this. What you have done and continue to do deserves condemnation. But you know that, and we're not going to talk about it forever. All we can offer is support, advice, and a place where you don't have to constantly defend yourself. If you need it, we're here. Rhonda has already said that she would be happy for you to stay with her for a while, if only to help you curb those self-destructive impulses with your husband's brother. This has to stop, and I think you understand that. Temporary relief from guilt is one thing, but it only prolongs the agony. If, Josh, right? If he's still talking to you, it will stop, if it continues and comes up, as I'm sure you understand. But that aside, you see who we are, what we've been through. You see that we only want to help. Are you interested in this? I can guarantee that you will find a sympathetic ear here, a lot of sarcasm, juicy gossip. While she nodded towards Gina, fashion tips as well as sex tips, and now she glanced slightly at Rhonda. We will be here by your side. We won't help you destroy your ex, but we will be here to help you pick up the pieces of your life. Does it sound good? Brooklyn looked at May, her eyes shining, then looked at Gina and Rhonda, and back to May. Her voice shook as she said, I think that sounds good. I really need something good right now. New friends, thank you for being here. Thank you for helping me. Her voice broke at the end, and May leaned over and patted her hand. Well, it won't be easy, but you're not alone now, child. Rhonda, it's time for you to help this lady pack her things before you go. May stood up and went into the kitchen, and then returned holding a bottle of Wollersheim Prairie Fumé wine. Here, I think you two will need a couple of bottles tonight. This one's for me. The good one is Prairie Fumé. Won 2 gold medals, you know. Who would have thought that Wisconsin could make great wine? She handed the bottle to Rhonda, who nodded her thanks to May as the other 3 women stood up. Thanks, May, said Rhonda. Same time next week? I'll be here, May replied as they headed towards the front door, all the women wrapping themselves back up in warm clothes in preparation for the cold weather. Bidding them farewell and giving them a big hug before they left, May closed the door and stood in the hall for a few minutes, taking in the past. Foolish old woman, she reproached herself. He's dead and won't come back. But then she looked up and said quietly, but I wish he hadn't gone. I love you, Randall. I will never stop loving you. She then frowned and went to remove the coffee utensils from the living room. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.